All right, let's dive into a company you've almost certainly got somewhere in your home. General Electric. You see that GE logo on everything, from kitchen appliances to jet engines. It's a brand we all recognize. But behind that familiar face, there's this incredible story of innovation, of immense power, and a controversy that actually sparked a global movement. So let's get into it.
So I've got a question for you. What could a light bulb, a jet engine, and a nuclear weapon possibly have in common? Well, the answer is the company that made all of them, General Electric. And yeah, that kind of weird combination perfectly captures the two very different sides of this industrial giant.
To really get GE, you have to go back to the very beginning. And the company's story, it's not just some dry business history. No, it's actually woven into the fabric of the modern world itself. And it all starts with one of the most famous inventors of all time.
This timeline isn't just GE's history. It's practically a map of the 20th century. It all started back in 1889, founded by Thomas Edison, with some serious backing from J.P. Morgan. By the 30s, they weren't just selling you a toaster, they were pretty much inventing consumer finance so you could afford to buy it. Then in the 50s, they became the first business in the world to own a computer. And for a while in the 60s, they were even going head-to-head with IBM. This is a company that has always been about constant reinvention.
And this stat right here really tells you a lot about their staying power. When the Dow Jones Industrial Average was first created, GE was one of the original 12 companies. Fast forward 120 years, through all the booms, the busts, and massive tech revolutions, and they were the only one left. That alone shows you just how incredibly influential and adaptable they are.
So that's the history, but honestly, it's the sheer scale of the company today that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. So just how big are we talking?
Okay, let's just start with this number. $650 billion in total assets. That is an absolutely staggering figure. To put that into perspective for you, it's more than the entire gross domestic product of a country like Sweden. We're not just talking about a big company here, we're talking about a global economic force.
And yep, the other numbers tell the exact same story. Over 300,000 employees, nearly $150 billion in revenue every single year. GE is playing on a level that very few companies can even dream of. And it's no surprise it's always ranked as one of the world's most valuable brands.
So with all that in mind, just take a guess. What do you think is GE's biggest source of income? Most people would probably say something like energy or maybe aviation, right? All those jet engines. But the real answer, it's probably not what you're thinking. Just look at this breakdown. It's pretty surprising, right? GE's largest segment, at 31%, is finance. We're talking everything from personal loans and credit cards to these massive financial services for the energy sector. And this is our first real clue that GE is so much more than just an industrial company. It's a financial juggernaut, and this is where our story starts to take a much, much darker turn. Yeah, it turns out it's not all light bulbs and wind turbines. There is a very different side to GE's history. A time when its business dealings sparked this huge international outrage and led to a massive public campaign against the company.
So, picture this. It's the 1980s, the height of the Cold War. And it turns out General Electric was the #1 producer of components for major nuclear weapon systems in the entire United States. And this wasn't some small side project for them, it was a core part of their business.
Now, a fact like that, it doesn't go unnoticed. Activist groups started to organize, and they argued that GE was, as this quote from a campaign film at the time put it, building weapons for profit, not for patriotism. And that idea, that sentiment, it just caught fire. It launched one of the biggest corporate boycotts in history.
What happened next was a real David versus Goliath story. It all kicked off with a film that exposed GE's role, and that sparked a nationwide boycott of all their products. Of course, GE fought back, hard. They quadrupled their advertising budget. But the movement just kept growing, eventually getting to 4 million people in the US alone. After 7 long years of pressure and losing over $50 million in sales, GE finally caved. They got out of the nuclear weapons business. It was just a stunning victory for grassroots activism.
But believe it or not, the controversy didn't end there. A more subtle, but maybe equally troubling problem popped up when GE decided to buy one of America's biggest news networks. And that created a massive, massive ethical dilemma.
Okay, so real quick, let's just be clear on our terms. A conflict of interest is basically when the goals of two different groups are fundamentally at odds with each other. And in this case, those two groups were a news organization and its corporate parent.
So here's the deal. In 1986, GE buys the news network NBC.
Just a few years later, the Gulf War starts. And at that time, GE was supplying parts and systems for pretty much every single major weapon being used by the US military. Think about that. The company that owned the news was also building the weapons being reported on by the news. And we're not just talking about little screws and bolts here. We're talking about critical systems for Tomahawk cruise missiles, the stealth bomber, B-52s. The same company whose news anchors you saw on TV had a history that even included research connected to the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
So this is where it gets really sticky. You've got NBC News, whose entire mission is supposed to be reporting the news impartially, right? And then you have its parent company, General Electric, whose mission is to profit from selling the very weapons being praised on that news coverage. So how can an analyst on NBC give you an unbiased opinion on a missile system when their paycheck is ultimately signed by the company that built it? It's a textbook and a pretty disturbing conflict of interest.
Now, this particular chapter did eventually close. In 2013, after nearly 3 decades, General Electric sold its final stake in NBC to Comcast, and that officially put an end to this direct conflict.
So, where does all this leave us? I mean, how are we supposed to reconcile the image of the company that brought us the light bulb with the corporation that became the target of a massive international boycott? Innovator or war profiteer?
You really have to hold both of these realities in your head at the same time. On one side, you have the innovator, an original Dow Jones company, a pioneer in computing, and now a leader in wind energy. But on the other side, you have the controversial corporation, a former top nuclear weapons maker that profited from war coverage on its own news channel. Both of these are General Electric.
And just to be clear, GE is absolutely still a major defense contractor today. The key difference now is where their focus is. They're primarily in the business of manufacturing engines for military aircraft, not building the complete weapon systems that landed them in so much hot water in the past.
And that really brings us to the final question. General Electric undeniably changed the world. It powered our homes, it revolutionized medicine, it pushed technology forward in countless ways. But it also built weapons of mass destruction and created these really profound ethical conflicts. So, when a company changes the world for both better and for worse, who gets to decide how it's remembered? Who gets to write the final chapter of its history?